Our guest today is Nathan Castro, a PhD turned entrepreneur, shifting the paradigm of cartilage repair and regeneration.
In the US specifically, you're looking at millions of patients that suffer from joint pain and different severities, most severe cases that require total joint replacement. He is definitely more of the front-facing CEO type individual. I'm more of the research-focused, CTO position, and that's what our positions are within Nanocon. We at Nanocon really tend to run lean. To this day, I have just in the other room a 3D printer, which I use to do R&D parts as well as test parts. When you're in research, or even just in life in general, 9 times out of 10, things don't really go the way you plan, but there's always that 10% that does. Don't be afraid to take even the smallest calculated risk, because over time, you're building up your confidence, toughening your skin, as it were. You're getting stronger.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of The Founder's Code. Our guest today is Nathan Castro, a PhD turned entrepreneur. Him and his co-founder have raised $6 million to build Nanocon, a health tech company which is shifting the paradigm of cartilage repair and regeneration. Hi, Nathan. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the vision behind Nanocon?
Sure. So Nanocon was co-founded by myself and my business partner, Ben Holmes, as PhD students at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. back in 2016. My background is more directly related to 3D printing and biomaterials. And what really, started my trajectory down this path was both, personal injury. I've suffered from knee problems pretty much my entire life and adolescence, requiring multiple knee surgeries, and just looking at, pursuing graduate studies to better resolve and better introduce products that could, alleviate both my personal issues, but also provide the greatest impact to the largest population.
And how big is the problem that you're trying to solve?
So, there are different levels of cartilage damage in the knee and in other articulating joints. So, we classify them both between acute and chronic injuries. Acute injuries like, accidents, falls, things of that nature. Chronic, which is, pretty much termed as wear and tear. So just your body's natural, process of breaking down over time. And in the US specifically, you're looking at millions of patients that suffer from joint pain and different severities from, dullness and limited mobility to most severe cases that require total joint replacement. So, at Nanocon, what we're looking to do is we're developing a technology that will address really those early stage, those younger patients who are suffering from osteoarthritis or acute injuries.
Out of all of the possible directions you can take in health tech, why specifically cartilage repair?
So, as I mentioned, I myself suffer from, I would say somewhat debilitating knee pain, and it's really more anatomic than anything else, and that resulted in me partially dislocating my knee almost like 50 times during my entire adolescence. Up until the age of 18 is when I had my first knee surgery, and then I had a subsequent injury in a major biking accident a few years later, which required me to have my second surgery. But all the while, the idea there was just from personal experience. But I would say, going into biomedical related research was more so a product of mentors and people whom I crossed paths during my academic studies. And so I definitely didn't follow the traditional pathway that most, high school graduates do and go straight to a 4-year university and then, you know, move on to either professional studies or graduate studies. I kind of diverted a little bit because I wasn't completely sure as to what I really wanted to do with my life, as it were. So, after high school, I went to a trade school. Um, the idea of going into IT and some computer related profession, and then I quickly realized that it was a little bit redundant, not as exciting as I would have liked, and honestly, I didn't feel like it would allow me to satisfy my inherent need to create something. And aside from the fact that I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. Both my grandfathers were small business owners. My father was a
Mm.
small business owner. And, when I was in elementary school, I would, sell school supplies to my classmates and, you know, had that, entrepreneurial spirit to, to be in the commercial space.
And how did
So
that entrepreneurial spirit play out during your academia years?
So it really allowed me to, and I would say that to a certain extent, it was very serendipitous. The timing that I started my doctoral work, because when I started my doctoral studies at George Washington University, they had just started to embark on an initiative to really raise their prominence in science and engineering, as well as invest a lot more in tech transfer and IP development. So what I would say is that when I started the my doctoral studies, it was really at a pivotal moment, both in my personal life, but as well as in the trajectory of the university. So my background going into my PhD was really on additive manufacturing, or as we colloquially refer to it as 3D printing,
Hmm.
where I was working with materials that could be 3D printed and specifically hydrogels, which are light sensitive, and they would essentially um, convert from a liquid state to a semi-solid state when exposed to light. And we can use this stereolithographic technique to create structures that would otherwise be more difficult, if not impossible, to create using traditional manufacturing methods. But
Similar
also,
to teeth fillings.
yeah, exactly. So,
Hmm.
like one of the very, very first hydrogels or photocurable resins that was adopted. It was developed at in collaboration with the National Institutes of Standards and Testing, um, where I was a postdoc at,
Hmm.
but also through the American Dental Association. So, teeth fillings are exactly what these type of hydrogels are. They're photocurable resins that harden when exposed to light. So, so that's what that was the first venture that I went through, and then I expanded my PhD studies because when I started back in 2011, I would say that was right at the apex of the hacker movement, where you had both the expiration of the governing patent for stereolithography and subsequent 3D printing. So then you had this big influx of these, tabletop or commercial 3D printers that could be put together with off the shelf components. So what I did for my PhD and what essentially became the cornerstone for my PI's lab was I took one of these tabletop 3D printers and I retrofitted it by replacing the tools that came with that particular brand or model of printer, and made a stereolithography system myself.
Hmm.
So that allowed us to explore in the lab, embedding different biological materials or embedding nanomaterials within these liquid resins and then 3D printing them into a specific structure to look at musculoskeletal.
When you're working in one of those labs, do the inventions belong to you or the university or the team that's sponsoring the
So,
experiments?
so typically, when you're pursuing uh, doctoral studies at most, if not all universities, any IP that's generated is property of the university. So, you know, when when my co-founder Ben and I were pursuing our PhDs, there were several ideas that we generated, which we were able to, um, lodge IP for, and um, and some of it we licensed when we founded Nanocon from the university to kind of pursue our commercial venture. Um, Subsequent to that, we've generated even more IP, which is solely owned by our company. But yeah, to answer your question, um, pretty much all IP rights are property of the university. But I should say, there at GW, as I alluded to earlier, they were really investing heavily into tech transfer, and as part of that influx of investment, they also participated in a National Science Foundation program by the name of ICOR. There's a national program, but there's also regional programs throughout the United States. So Ben and I participated in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia cohort. So one of the requirements to participate in that program was that you, as one of the students slash co-inventors of a technology, had to have already had an IP vetted and lodged by the university. So the idea of this ICOR is was to essentially do an extensive amount of what we call customer discovery, which essentially is just you going out and speaking with any and all parties that would be involved on either the manufacturing, commercialization, or end use of your prospective technology.
So kind
So
of an accelerator model.
yep, exactly. And so it was a 10-week program, and you know, I being more of the and I should say that both myself and Ben, we participated in the program in the same cohort, but we participated separately because we had two different technologies that we were trying to essentially determine the commercial viability for. So, one thing that really has helped Nanocon reach the obtain the position that we have now is, I think the combination of Ben's efforts and my efforts. And, during the ICOR program, I'll be honest in admitting that I was the kind of the lowest performing participant. And, as part of this ICOR, you had to essentially do 10 or more interviews every week. And then after each week, you would give a synopsis of, your findings. And then we would use essentially this lean startup model to populate what was called our business model canvas. And then you would then parse out and determine at the end of those 10 weeks whether or not your technology is commercially viable or not, and whether or not your intent is to proceed with your venture or not proceed. So, I was the lowest performing because I had like maybe 40 something customer interviews. Ben, on the other hand, was the best performing. So he had, more than 100 customer interviews and really, really excelled at that. And, you know, he and I recently were on another podcast together where we spoke a little bit of kind of our joint history. And I'll definitely, say that at the end of our ICOR program, what we decided to do, and really what became the seed that germinated into Nanocon, was that we decided to combine efforts So he is definitely more of the front facing, you know, um, CEO type individual. I'm more of the research focused, you know, CTO position, and that's what our positions are within Nanocon.
And how did
Ben
that
is.
initial conversation to start working together on a new venture? How did that happen?
I think it happened shortly before the end of the ICOR program ending, where you know we both saw some commercial potential. We both had that drive to want to pursue something that we felt could translate effectively from the bench to the bedside. Um, and, because we were from the same lab, we've been working together for a few years prior to, I'd like to say that, as part of my roles and responsibilities in that lab, I was the first graduate student for my PI. I really helped her build the lab from just a two-person team that we were initially to, a team that, you has now probably more than 20 alumni in it. So as part of my roles, in addition to doing my own research for my own PhD, I was also the lab manager. So I would train incoming people. I would, assist them on their projects and their work, um, which is reflected in my publication history. So Ben was one of those students who came into our lab originally intending to pursue just a master's, but then fell in love with the work and saw the potential and decided to stay on for his PhD. So, we have had already a longstanding good rapport, and as I'm sure some of your other guests on the podcast have mentioned, but something I want to kind of reiterate is that going into business is more of an exercise in social skills than anything else, and developing relationships, and managing those relationships, because obviously people come from different backgrounds and different personalities. So if you really want to be successful, and something that you know I carry with me to this day is, I like to maintain good relations with anyone and everyone that I come across, because you never know down the road when your paths may cross, and if that might lead to some potential venture, which with Ben and myself, it definitely did. And I'll also preface kind of Nanocon by saying that prior to the ICOR program, Ben and I were also critical members of another startup from GW that he and I helped uh, with their efforts to obtain 510K regulatory approval.
Mm-hmm.
So we had some experience, just not directly related to a product or an idea of our own creation. But he and I were the engineering and regulatory side of Sonostic is the name of the company, and that's where we kind of really honed our skills on what it took to at least generate the fundamental data and evidence to show a potential investor the viability of your idea and your product.
And what does the day-to-day life of a health tech founder look like?
I mean, right now I wear multiple hats, aside from being having my partner and my 4-year-old, and playing, or I wouldn't even say playing, but being an active participant in my in their lives. We at Nanocon really tend to run lean, so a lot of my work is kind of still carry over from even back in my PhD days, where to this day, I have just just in the other room a 3D printer, which I use to do R&D parts as well as test parts for some of our preclinical and bench testing. So I'm still actively printing. I'm still actively tinkering, as it were. But also, we have one of our lead investors. Um, uh, they also they have an organization that has helped us develop custom tooling to accompany our implant. So from the time that we founded the company in 2016 till now, we've gone through multiple iterations of the implant design, and we've also gone through a couple of regulatory submissions, which presented comments that we had to address, and therefore, had to kind of pivot a little bit. But all that being said, yeah, my current roles are I do a lot of the initial R&D, 3D printing. I manage all of our contract services as well as our manufacturing. So, really, really being efficient on capital expenditure and applying those finances to value add testing that will get us either one to a closer step to the next milestone to unlock additional funding, or also as well as get us further moving forward to regulatory approval. So I
And
you know
being in a health tech, especially with devices that you have to pass through a lot of kind of hurdles to be able to make them commercially available to people
mhm,
to buy. So there is a substantial period of time before you're actually generating revenue to cover for the expenses.
correct.
When raising money, how did you go about the decision of how much to raise and who to raise from, and how
Mhm.
long would you need of a timeline of a runway before the product can hit the market?
Yeah, so we in 2016 when we founded, Ben was able to stay and dedicate a bulk of his time to fundraising. So the initial tranches of monies that were raised both came from family and friends, as well as we pursued non-dilutive federal funding to support small projects that would be, as I mentioned, be value add projects to give us material that we can present to other potential investors and offices. So Ben was able to kind of lead those efforts. I, on the other hand, had to pursue the postdoctoral route because I didn't have the ability to just support myself while dedicating a lot of time to Nanocon.
Yeah.
So I went overseas, worked in Australia for a couple of years on translational research directly related to what we're doing at Nanocon, and then moved here to back to the U.S. to uh, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and then finally out here to UC Irvine.
How was the Australian period for your co-founding relationship?
I would say, it proved to be a little bit difficult, just mainly because of the time
Time.
difference. But yeah, we were, Ben had received a grant to do a small animal study. So I would on my off time, would send him codes to run on our 3D printer, and he would print some of the implants and things of that nature. And then also, during that period, we met a gentleman who is still currently involved in our company as to this day, who is a serial biotech and medtech entrepreneur, um, and was able to get guidance from him. Um, but but yeah, it was really really imperative to get and be to get as I keep uh, emphasizing value add data. You can easily put money towards projects and experiments that won't necessarily give you a data set that would provide a compelling commercial story, but it'll give you like good science. Not to say that biotech and medtech isn't based on good science. It's just really about what are the specific questions you need to create or to develop the story that will translate into a commercial pitch deck that will keep investors interested, as well as keep your technology developing and progressing forward.
And you've mentioned the mentor who provided you guidance. Uh, can you tell us about some people who've played that role for you, and what are the main lessons that they've taught you that affected the way you run company?
Yeah, I mean, I would say first and foremost, my father and my grandfathers really showed me what work ethic is, and the amount of time and effort it takes to create a sustainable and a successful company. Throughout my professional career and my academic career, because Nanocon is my first venture into industry outside of an academic setting. A lot of my mentors and a lot of my you know uh, guides along this pathway have come from my academic profession. So my PI in the grad school, she allowed us the freedom to explore intellectually and to really you know test our ideas empirically in the lab, to really determine whether or not there's viability there. And then even my postdoctoral advisors, Dr. Atanasio, most recently Dr. Hutmacher in in Australia, both of whom are successful entrepreneurs and have biotech companies that they've started and have successfully launched products. They themselves also shared a lot of insight um, into how to approach an idea, how to cultivate that idea, and also from a personal standpoint, give me the confidence to continue on, because I feel like that was the most crucial aspect um, for anyone in general, is just to have have that have that belief, inherent belief, not only in yourself, but have some of that partial validation by other people whom you look to, um, and giving you that extra positive reinforcement to tell you, yes, what you're doing makes sense. What you're doing may not bear fruit in the short term, but over time, be it monetarily or be it you know societal impact, just having that vote of confidence. And you know I will say that you know um, my most recent PI, Dr. Atanasio, he he uh, it makes me a little bit somewhat a little bit emotional, kind of speaking about this, because I lost my father when I was going through my academic career. I've gone through a bit of personal loss throughout my entire academic studies, starting with the loss of my brother when I was doing well, not even prior to that, starting with my mother having a major stroke when I was finishing my undergraduate studies, which rendered her quadriplegic. So I had to not only tend to my academic studies, but also tend to my mother during her recovery, and then getting her to a point where she was able to partially take care of herself with the assistance of my sister and and other immediate family, which allowed me to venture away from home, as it were. Coming from a Mexican family or Hispanic background, as I'm sure with other cultures, it's really family oriented and family centric and close. So, I was born and raised in El Paso, Texas, right on the New Mexico U.S. border. And my parents kind of broke the mold by allowing me to venture away for my own, academic and professional pursuits, which is, I feel is not very common for most people coming from where I'm from. So, that allowed me to, you know, take my first position at a government lab when I was doing my undergrad, which led to me publishing my first paper, led to me publishing my first book chapter, allowed me to, establish some prominence in the, in undergraduate research community, opened the doors for me to apply for and to receive, fellowships that supported my undergraduate career, my master's, and my graduate career. So all of that wouldn't have been possible without the support that I received from my parents. So I finished my undergrad, stayed in El Paso for my master's, and then shortly after moving to DC for my PhD, my brother you know suddenly passed away, and then when I shortly shortly after moving to Australia for my first postdoc, my grandfather and my father passed away one day apart from each other.
Sorry to hear that.
So I had to fly back halfway across the world to, tend to my father and my grandfather's passing, and then leading up to transitioning full time to Nanocon. So I moved out to Southern California in February of 2020, right, literally a month before the shutdown and the pandemic was really in its starting to rise and get close to its peak.
Mhm.
So shortly thereafter, I met my partner. Um, she became pregnant with our son, and we found out in utero that my son had several um, congenital issues that we were uncertain as to the severity of. So thankfully with you Dr. Atanasio and my position at the time at UC Irvine allowed me to spend more time with my partner to help her go through that pregnancy. And when my son was born, we spent 3 months, his first 3 months of life, in the hospital, tending to the medical issues that he had, and not to delve too much into his condition, but he has uh, what is called vectoral association. So it's essentially um, it's referred to an association because there's no underlying genetic cause for it. It's essentially just a combination of different physical abnormalities that a child is born with, and vectoral, VACTERL, is just an acronym for the different parts of the body that are affected. Those being vertebral, um, anal, rectal, cardiac, tracheal, esophageal, renal, and limb. So, in order for a person to be diagnosed with vectoral association, they have to have at least three of those um, affected parts. And my son has that, and unfortunately, that led to him having to require several major surgeries um, due to these abnormalities. And going back to your previous question, where you were asking about what inspired you to pursue you know Nanocon, or what's the inspiration. And I will say that just being receptive to receiving inspiration from any any uh, any direction, I think, is critically important. So, for instance, my son back in 2023 he underwent a major surgery, which unfortunately resulted in in him being hospitalized for several months thereafter. We were having difficulties in stabilizing his blood chemistry because due to his condition, he suffers from kidney disease, and we were told early on that he would require a kidney transplant, possibly sooner rather than later. But if we can take care of him and minimize hospitalizations, we can extend the need for that transplant to be needed. But in 2023, we were close to losing him because he suffered a severe infection. And I will say during the course of his recovery, he had to he was given quite a lot of medications. One of those was difficult to administer because he would constantly be vomiting, or as it's clinically referred to, have emesis because of the nature of the medication. So me, being a scientist by training, saw the problem that my son was having in terms of not being able to tolerate the medication as it was being administered. I was able to, as most parents do, if not all parents do, look to try to find an answer to the problem that your child is facing, or meet the needs that your child requires. So I was able to I looked through the literature and was able to find a rather austere journal article that spoke to a methodology by which we could treat some of the formula he was being given to remove one of those components and allow for him to tolerate it. So I took it upon myself, as I've done historically throughout my academic career, is I buy things on my own. I experiment on my own. Well, not on my own person, sometimes on my own person, but I do the initial work to prove the idea, and then I'll present it. And at that time, because we were just having difficulties with my son, I took the initiative to do this in the hospital while the nurses were there and his nephrologist, and was able to educate his clinical team on this particular procedure, and they received it without any pushback, which I appreciate, but also are looking to adopt it for patients that are also in need of this, or who could benefit from this particular treatment. So not that has any direct commercial potential, although how best to optimize the process, or how can we package it so that way your non-scientist parent or patient can use it with little to no issue. So looking at efficiency, which is similar to what we did at Sonostic. We were looking at peripheral IV access in let's say patients with high BMIs, which are clinically termed to be difficult sticks. So they would require imaging guidance to locate a vein and then to actually place a catheter. So with that particular venture, Ben, myself, and the rest of the Sonostic team developed a single-handed use device to do peripheral IV cannulation under ultrasound guidance. So there's always, I don't know if it's a unique mentality that I have or the way that I kind of approach these problems, but it's just really learning from my practical experience, being confronted by a problem, and then look using the resources I have available.
What helps you cope with all of the challenges and difficulties that life throws at you? Because it must have a huge psychological strain
Hmm.
on having so many losses in your life. What helps you, you know, get back up and see a positive future for yourself during even the darkest of times?
Yeah, I would definitely say that putting prioritizing my mental health was really one aspect that really helped me at least talk through some of my feelings and talk through you know the losses and try and develop healthy coping mechanisms for those. So even back when my mother fell ill, there's always this stigma, especially like in the Hispanic community, of machismo and men not speaking about their problems or not opening up and not being vulnerable. Um, Again, my parents um, gave me the confidence to walk down my own path, but also I myself, even prior to you know my mother falling ill, when I moved out of El Paso on my own for the first time, I made it a point to really try to understand relationships and um, you know try to see multiple perspectives and try to understand what really motivates and drives people. And for me, it's I would say more so just the day to day satisfaction that I have with you know even the most minute of successes. So like when you're in research or even just in life in general, nine times out of 10 things don't really go the way you planned or the way you intended, but that there's always that 10% that does. So I tend to not only look at the glass half full, but even when it's 10% volume, I tend to use those quote unquote failures as learning, as teachable moments to understand. Okay, well, this particular thing didn't happen. I was expecting it to happen, so why didn't it? And how could I approach it differently? And that's you know what I would say motivates me to this day is just relishing in the you know in the small snapshots of positivity. People are unwilling to speak you know respectfully to one another, or at least even give each other the time to express themselves or to convey a thought or an idea. We just need to.
Without a fear of being assassinated.
Exactly, yeah, without being the fear of getting shot, or both both literally and figuratively, but also and this also comes in when you're fundraising for your company, not the assassination aspect of it, but it there could be uh, criticisms and harsh criticisms of your technology or your idea, and not allowing that to dampen your passion, um, but inspiring you to approach it differently. I think is critically important. But yeah, my mental health, both from individual one-on-one therapy to group, settings, just being able to be vulnerable and to to try to obtain an objective opinion, because I find a lot of times, you know, people will confide in both friends and family, and sometimes, friends and family don't give you an objective assessment of what you're going through, or give you the most um, healthy advice. So, I tend to try to pursue advice from objective perspectives, just so that way I myself don't get lulled into the doldrums of
Biased
bias. Yep,
opinion of somebody who's not trying to risk to hurt your feelings.
exactly. And risk, I think, is a very important concept for all facets of life. You some people, you're afraid to risk stepping out of the door any given day. Other people are the antithesis of that. Um, and so being able to, one, have the strength to and the consciousness to take a calculated risk. Emphasis on the word calculated, because not all risks are good risks. um, and I can definitely attest to some risky behavior I've done in the past, both academically and personally. But you know it all has to be thought about and analyzed to a certain degree for the cost to benefit of that risk.
And if we take like being able to risk being seen in negative light as something that founders need to have, almost need to have, to be assertive and to stand their ground at times.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the other qualities that you think being a great founder requires you to have?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think first and foremost would be having good social skills, as I mentioned previously.
What does
Being
that
able to,
entail?
I mean, from a personal standpoint, just how to effectively communicate with someone. You know, at the end of the day, a business is like a personal relationship. Albeit Ben and I have had a long-standing relationship for more than 10 years, um, and you know I would be remiss to say that we haven't had our slight disagreements here and there, but at the end of the day, we've had a shared collective goal in mind, and that is to you know make Nanocon as successful as we can. From my own day to day activities, managing relationships with vendors, managing relationships with service providers, with our own limited staff. Um, all of that is really an exercise on relationship building, effective communication, um, being efficient with both your time and also being mindful of other people's time. So I think sometimes, to my own detriment, when I'm speaking to a vendor, I kind of take their perspective a little bit too much in consideration, where I'm willing to be lenient on lead times, or I'm willing to be lenient on missed deadlines and things of that nature, where I could probably stand to be a little bit more rigid, um, because I'm just have a little bit more empathy and sympathy. So that in and of itself is another character quality that I think is imperative to being successful, is to have sympathy and also to have empathy for not only your employees, but for those around you, because that just to me makes you more relatable as a human being. If you can emote feelings and be expressive, as opposed to as it were being the wizard behind the curtain, a la Wizard of Oz, where you
Like
don't want to just,
Zuckerberg.
you don't want to be viewed as just a distant being out there who is the omnipotent being of this organization, but you want to be approachable. You want to again be vulnerable. So it's a fine line. It's a fine line that you have to really walk, of being that strong, assertive, um, type A personality, but also allowing for yourself to be critically spoken to, and to accept criticism, um, however harsh it may be, outside of being blatantly offensive. But you really need to kind of really know how to deal with both praise and criticism.
How do you balance it within yourself? The will to seem nice, to be perceived as good by other people, but at the same time, to not betray yourself and your needs and your company's needs.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's important there is being genuine. So as you kind of some of the terms you used in that question, a facade or project. I try not to carry on a facade or project this type of personality or behavior.
So no fake
I
it till you make it.
no. I mean, from a personal standpoint, I don't think you. I think you set yourself up for very difficult times if you tend to be disingenuous and fake certain aspects. Um, and again, being the CTO of Nanocon, I rely, and obviously being a scientist by training, I rely on data. And as you know, the story the story of Nanocon is the story of true and honest data. So we don't try to oversell or overhype our technology. We're not the what was that organization? Uh, the name
The
the
blood
name.
sampling.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. We're not that, nor do we promote to be that. What is also my critical role is to ensure that the commercial story we're telling is reflected in the data and reflected in hard truth and facts. There's no alternative reality here or alternative facts in what would leads to a successful business. Because at the end of the day, as with that individual in that organization, it all comes full circle. So you know your 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 personal as well as corporate credibility also carries a lot of weight, especially if you're like at Nanocon, where we're developing a platform technology that can be expanded into other indications, meaning other joints in the body, or even potentially other medical devices. Because Nanocon is in essence a material-based technology. So, this is just our chondrograft is just one indication of many that are rumorating in my mind, and we also have active projects developing. So I think not compromising your credibility for short-sighted gains is also critically important.
So playing the long game,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Yeah, and we're living by those words because as I mentioned, we founded in 2016, and we're almost approaching our 10-year anniversary, and we Ben and I have been at it for near a decade, and you know, which is I wouldn't say is outside of the realm of normal for a med tech company. But I would imagine it being even more so if we were not, a solely a medical device company. If we were a combinatorial or even a therapeutic, then things would be then you would have even a longer lead time because there's even more regulatory um, scrutiny.
Crazy. And as a last question, what can you advise to all of the people currently pursuing their path of academia, PhDs, masters, who are looking at the entrepreneurial world of startups and are feeling maybe a bit hesitant or scared or have thoughts in the side of their head that, no, that's probably not for me. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not capable enough. I'm not assertive enough. I'm not enough. What could you tell to those people to help them make a decision to give it a try? Or maybe even decide whether it's really for them or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, right? The opportunities that you miss are the risks that you didn't take. So, I understand from my own personal experience how scary taking that first step can be. But, and I understand that not everyone has the support system that I was gracious enough to have, because just this past May, I also lost my mother as well. So my my immediate family is just dwindling by the day. Um, but that's where I value friendships and value mentors and keep try to keep good relations because an individual support system doesn't necessarily start and end that immediate family. You can create a network, and I encourage people to create uh, a healthy network for themselves. But to your question, or to my piece of advice is, don't be afraid to take even the smallest calculated risk, because over time you're building up your confidence. You're toughening your skin, as it were. You're getting stronger. Yes, because what I learned from the time that I had with my brother is that he and I were somewhat opposites in the fact that I was more extroverted, he was more introverted. I was more the risk taker. He was, you know, very much shy and timid. But that didn't stop me from conveying my experiences to him as either a source of inspiration to try to motivate him to pursue his own pathways and take his own risks, but also to share with him that there's so much to life if you just give yourself the ability to both take the risk, take accountability for the results of that decision, learn from it, and then put all that effort into moving forward. So as you mature and evolve. So I think we, definitely want to do that. And one other last piece of advice that I, carried on throughout my academic career even when I was in Australia, in terms of testing out your own ideas, is, sometimes it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. Meaning that if you have an idea, at least for me, like in an academic setting where there is a hierarchy, I had ideas, but they weren't convincing enough to my PI or my mentor. So what I did is I would go out and I would buy supplies on my own, do the initial experiments on my own, prove or disprove the idea through, empirical evidence, and then present that. So therefore, I've satisfied my own curiosity, but also I've created something tangible that, a would-be decision maker, be it your advisor, be it, your manager at your job, or even, the manager of a VC fund, just having something in hand to prove or disprove your idea. If for all else, just for personal satisfaction, to quell that curiosity that you have yourself. That's something that that I've done, and I think has led to good results.
To me, this sounds like live a life in a way that would minimize the number of regrets you would have, or the things we only regret things that we haven't tried, we haven't taken the risks to do. Right? We rarely regret something that we've done.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for being so open, authentic, and vulnerable on our episode today. I want to wish you and Ben all the best in bringing Nanocon to the market. I can't wait to get to see your first launch in the world, and be able to maybe take another interview and see how much you would have changed by then, and maybe the lesson that you've learned on the way to there. Yeah.
No, definitely. I welcome the opportunity, and I, enjoy and applaud you for what you're doing. I think, really getting into the personal lives of founders and allowing us the platform to share our own experiences and what really motivates us benefits not only me, because it serves as a catharsis for my own personal personal feelings, but also, serves to enlighten your audience.
Because real life of a founder is much deeper and broader than what you see on LinkedIn posts.
Most definitely.